Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast where a behavioral scientist examines what it's like to live a humorous life. Glimpse into the lives of the funniest people in entertainment, business, and science as your host, Dr. Peter McGraw, explores their habits, motivations, and secrets to success. Get ready to fire up your brain and your funny bone. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to a live taping of I'm Not Joking, the podcast that looks at the lives of funny people. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's guest is Michael Smith. Michael is a musician, veteran, husband, and father. He graduated from Heidelberg College with a bachelor's in music with a focus on clarinet. He also received a master's in musicology from the University of Rochester. He spent most of his career with the Detroit Symphony Orchestra as orchestra manager, then general manager, then vice president and general manager. He served for 12 years as the executive director of the Colorado Music Festival. Now retired, he joins me from his residence at the Academy Senior Living in Boulder, Colorado. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
So, Michael, if you didn't have a career in music and the arts, what would you have done?
Well, I think I would have chosen the American decorative arts scene. It's something that I really began to get very interested really in my later years, and was able to get involved with a number of projects at the Winter Tour Museum in Delaware, as well as the Historic New England organization in Boston. And it grew on me as I've been sort of collecting periodicals on antiques for years. I have a library stacked with antiques magazines and so forth and so on. And it's something that I had in my background a lot of Americana through family and so forth and so on. And I think if I could do it now, I would be an antiques dealer.
Okay. So an American decorative art scene is a fancy way to say antiques dealer?
Well, it's sort of spread. I mean, it's talking about the general atmosphere, the general environment, the general history of, and the settings of period and that sort of thing. So
Okay.
It's not just furniture, it's interiors of houses, architectural elements of houses, and so forth and so on.
Okay, so I know nothing about this. So
Okay.
my house is filled with mid-century modern.
Okay, I know that too.
Right, so beyond that and beyond some trips to a museum, I really don't know much about this. So what qualifies something as an antique?
The age spread has expanded over the years. I mean, there was a general feeling that anything after 1830, I would say even into the 1950s, after 1830 was not considered antique. That now has moved because time has moved. And so there's a more of an appreciation of articles of later date that are included in the concept of antique.
Okay.
So, sorry, I'm moving away from the microphone. I didn't mean to do that.
He's excited.
Yeah.
So you said 50s. So is my stuff in my house, my fake?
It's not fake. If it's real mid-century modern,
I
it's
think
important.
I got some Barcelona chairs that are replicas.
Even so. I mean, it's a trend. And if you look at the broad idea of American decorative arts, mid-century modern is all part of that.
I see.
It's a broad term that's now very much in use because particularly the Winter Tour Arts program, when you go for a master's there, you can choose subjects of very recent nature dealing with American decorative arts.
So, I'm fascinated by this idea because one of the things I like about furniture is that notion of form and function.
Yes.
That is that, you can sit in a chair like the ones that we're sitting in, which is more functional than form, but the idea that you can decorate a home with furniture and not just put art on the walls, you know what I mean? Like that kind of idea. What is the origins of that notion of turning furniture into artwork?
Wow.
I realize this is just your made-up career that you were going to pursue, and so...
That's really hard to determine. I mean, over the years, when you start with the early settlers, they had very, very few objects in their houses. Mm-hmm. In the 19th century, when the Industrial Revolution occurred, people sought more objects for their homes, their interiors, and so forth and so on. It's a hard question to answer about labeling, and historians are still trying to label exactly contents of rooms. when many of the early American museum concepts, such as Deerfield in Massachusetts and Winterthur Museum in Delaware, were created by these gentlemen, the Flints, and in one case, in Deerfield's case, and DuPont in the other. The rooms were very crowded. So they were sort of overexpressing the American spirit. There was a very interesting book written by a woman called Out of the Attic, where she talks about the impetus of Americana, particularly in the 40s and 50s, which the Flints and to a certain degree DuPont and others captured to really grasp America as an anti-communist statement. It was a very kind of interesting concept that we were over-Americanizing interiors of museum rooms and so forth and so on.
Interesting. As a sort of response to the political climate.
One of the responses, yes. Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit.
Let's go somewhere else.
What you have spent your life doing, which is performing music and working with orchestras.
Okay.
Yeah. So, tell me about the Detroit Symphony Orchestra. What makes it different than a typical symphony orchestra?
Well, it's not that different from, in the scheme of orchestras, you have top-tier orchestras such as Cleveland, Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago, and New York. And Detroit was always considered in the second tier, along with Pittsburgh, Minneapolis, St. Louis, Los Angeles, San Francisco, to name some. And so the difference made principally in my mind was the fact of the level of prestige of one orchestra versus another. Okay. And in the orchestra world, lower orchestras are always trying to achieve the next step. Mm-hmm. And so in my day, basically the major five were the major five. Over the years, because of labor negotiations and that sort of thing, the Los Angeles and the San Francisco now are considered among the major five, and there's the major seven, at the last I noted. In Detroit's case, what makes it somewhat unique, in my experience, is that it has had a very rough history of survival. Again, lots of times dealing with the labor issues. Symphony orchestras are very much governed by the negotiations and the master agreements that the management and the orchestra members have to agree upon in order to keep them running and in order to keep them surviving. And in some cases, there are objections from the orchestra members that put things off. And in the case of Detroit, in my day, we negotiated every 3 years. And it was very, very tough to be able to get that contract agreed to in time to keep a season going. And sometimes there were rough spots. After I've left, I know that there was a 2-year hiatus with that orchestra where the whole operation stopped. Right. So it's not unique to Detroit necessarily, but it's one of the foibles and one of the obstacles that in the orchestra world you have to recognize and deal with.
And is that just because the level of talent necessary? Like, if it seems like a very pro-labor world, is that in part because it's just hard to get that good, and so once you're that good,
I think that's part of it. Yeah. I mean, when you think of an individual musician who has worked years and years and years in a practice room and in a studio and wanting to get in on an orchestra situation, I think to agree that's very true. They've worked hard and they expect a decent wage, and it's all peer related. And so in our day, we would watch the negotiations of the Pittsburgh Orchestra and the Los Angeles particularly, and we wanted to match that.
I see.
And so if you couldn't quite match that, then you would be back and forth in negotiations.
Who's the hardest member of the orchestra to, like, it can't be like the cymbal player, right? It has to be like the hardest, the flute. Who's the most demanding, who's the most valued, hardest to negotiate with member of an orchestra?
Well,
you don't have to name names.
Well, you don't. It doesn't work that way.
Okay.
I mean, what you have is a negotiating committee. They choose 5 to 7 members of the orchestra, and they become the representatives at the table. beyond that, beyond the basic wage and the basic conditions of a master agreement, then each individual musician, you do have to renegotiate a higher level. For instance, the concertmaster is going to come and say, okay, the basics are set. Now it's time for me to negotiate with you. And in that case, all orchestras have what are called personnel managers. They have those conversations. They bring it to management, and we try to settle on some appropriate salary.
I see. And this sounds like hard work.
In the times of stress and negotiations, it's tough. You lose all of the friendships that you had with your musicians at that time. It's like you are just on the other side of a wall, and it's very stressful. And I did 5 negotiations, so it was tiring.
It was. And so you're here for a reason.
Here in Boulder?
No, here on this podcast because you're funny.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that's what I've been told. And so I'm curious, did you use your sense of humor at all in these negotiations?
You couldn't.
Okay.
It was serious business, and you just really couldn't. I mean, our team laughed among ourselves, but the other team wasn't in the room. From that,
I'm a professor. I know what that's like.
Yeah. I mean, we had our negotiating lawyer was a hysterical guy. I mean, he was very, very funny, but you didn't take that into the closed room with the opposites across the table. You would never do that.
So I'm a business school professor, so that's why I was asking about differentiating yourself. So it sounds like one thing that you differentiate yourself with is talent, right? So the more talented the symphonies, usually the higher ranked, and so on. But are there other ways that symphonies differentiate themselves, like in their choice of music, or is there basically, can you rise and fall for any other reason besides the quality of the talent you have?
I mean, you can have highs and lows depending on your musical leadership, I think sometimes. The choice of a music director is always a big deal in the orchestra world. And in Detroit's case, it was very interesting. I started with a Sixten Ehrling in 1969, and he was this very stolid, serious Swedish conductor, wonderful with the contemporary. He loved his Stravinsky and he loved 20th century music. But he was stiff and reserved and very Scandinavian with his public and with his donors. And it was a hard mix at that time. So then we flip-flopped and went to a very sort of luscious Italian conductor who was oozing all the time with his public and everything, but he was not a very good music director. So it was back and forth. You know, the choices you make are choices that are helped by the musicians, helped by a board directors, helped by donors, but you're trying to find the right mix at any particular moment.
You know, this is useful to hear because I've always thought that conductors were overrated. And so you're saying they're not. They serve multiple purposes in terms of guiding musical choices, assessing talent, and then also working outside-facing fundraising and so on.
My little story is when I got into the business, I came in through what is called the Ford Foundation Administrative Intern Program, which was a 10-year program the Ford Foundation felt was important at that stage. It ran from around 59 to 69 or 58 to 68. And the Ford Foundation at that time saw a need to go into youth and younger people who were very interested in arts management, whether it was orchestra, opera, theater, ballet, so forth and so on, because they felt that the Medici system, that's my term, was about to end, where you had very, very wealthy people in the community who kept the orchestra going with large gifts.
Okay.
And it didn't make so much difference who that music director was, as long as he was making music.
Okay.
So I was lucky to be in part of that program. And as a result, in my 23 years in Detroit, the staff went from 8 people to 50 in those 23 years. So what happened? The orchestras became corporations. They had to do that because the idea of major money coming from few donors was ending, and they needed to become a fundraising machine. They needed to become a marketing machine. All of those kinds of things. So it was a much bigger mix of need and information beyond just being plain old good music director, lousy music director.
I see. And so we'll step back even further. So you play clarinet.
Yeah.
Played clarinet. And so I assume you were on this track
I was.
and you decided to get off the track.
That's right. I did.
And so why was that?
Well, graduate school was a learning curve. I was clarinetists at that time were very strong. I mean, I can name about 5 that I was competing with who went on to Boston and Philadelphia and so forth and so on.
This is just in your master's program.
In my master's program. It was just a big field. I mean, suddenly here it was, and I thought, ooh, this is really going to be rough.
By the way, I know exactly what that's like.
You do?
Because, yes, I played drums in junior high school. And it was real. I had terrible rhythm.
Okay.
So I just knew I wasn't going to cut it in high school.
Okay.
And so I got into sports.
Yeah. All right. Well,
And it wasn't much better.
I didn't go that far.
Yeah, but I know the feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the wonderful opportunity of landing a job at the University of Rochester. I went to Eastman School, but it was one of the colleges of the University of Rochester, and I was able to get a position in the student activities area. And it was a terrific learning experience for me, and to see how I could work out with people and relate to people and sort of bring them together for resolution, even though they were undergraduates, on issues such as how to budget various clubs and that sort of thing. And I thought, maybe this is something that I really want to get into. And then I went from there down to Oberlin and was on the staff of the Conservatory of Music there and worked a lot with the professors and so forth and so on. So I was growing in this area of arts management.
I see. So we actually share that in our background. I worked in student affairs prior to getting into academia, and I was a hall director. So I managed a residence hall.
I was a proctor once too.
Yes, and that's hard work. I felt like after I had done that, I was ready for grad school. I was like, I can handle this advisor, versus 400 freshmen in an 8-story building and fire alarms at night and so on. Yeah, that said, though, that it was really useful for me. It helped my administrative skills. It helped my negotiating skills. Obviously, it was a good experience, but I don't miss it.
Okay.
I don't miss it terribly. In the same way that you probably don't miss negotiating.
Exactly. No.
Yes. Do you still play?
No.
Do you remember the last time you played a clarinet?
Well, yes, I sort of do. We used to go to Maine. I had a sister who had sort of a camp up there, and I took one summer when the kids were small, I took the clarinets along, thinking, well, I'll get them out and see what happens. And on her property, there was what we call a ledge. It's these rocky clearing kind of thing, and it was away from the main house in our sleeping cabin. And I went over there and I put up my music stand and I got out the clarinet.
It's like a Norman Rockwell painting or something, it sounds like.
So I'm noodling on the clarinet and had forgotten that down the hill was a family who kept quite a few Malamutes, the Huskies.
I like where this is going.
And so my sound went through the trees and down the hill, and suddenly there's this howling like crazy. And I was embarrassed, and I put it away, and I never brought them out again.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, that makes me sad. Again, this is bringing back memories of playing the drums at age 14. So I think I can feel your pain. How old were you at that time?
Well, Claire was alive, so she's 41, so I am 81, so she was a little tot. So it was 45, 46, 47, 48, something like that.
So you're like 44. Yep. Yes, okay.
Yep.
Wow. It's interesting. I find that I'm old enough now that I have several kind of episodes in life where I have made a conscious choice to close a chapter. I mean, I've been joking about the drums. That clearly wasn't one of those. But, in different times in life where I've just decided I am no longer X. So for me, my recent one was I played lacrosse for 25 years. And I played it for too many years, frankly. I was getting into my 40s. And it's a young man's game, and I have the injuries and the constant pain and, having the amount of work I had to do to try to continue to play at a high level. I just decided I'm going to retire. I'm going to kind of close this chapter. And I've done this a number of times in life, and frankly, I think it feels good, to be able to say, I did this at a high level. I did it in a way that I gave everything I could. I can't give everything I can, and I'd rather not do it than do it in a middling kind of way. I'm curious if you've had that experience. It sounds like the clarinet might have been similar.
Yeah, that was a closure.
Yeah.
Gosh, I mean, I moved from job to job because of certain situations.
Mm-hmm. Opportunities.
Opportunities. Like, yeah. And I guess I just see my life as a continuum of something that I never expected to be in. I mean, I never expected really to be in music management for as long as I was in various forms. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate what I learned in that stream, but I'm also glad that I am finished with that.
Yes.
And that I can slow down, I guess I would have to say, and just sort of reflect if I want to on it. And because there were a lot of hard knocks along the way, it wasn't easy. So,
well, I have a saying that anything worth doing is not going to be easy.
Yeah.
I've been asking this question to my guests, and it's not going over well. So don't feel pressure to get me to keep asking this question.
Sure.
But during your career, did you have a rival or an enemy, or as we like to say these days, a frenemy?
A rival.
A rival? Like, did you, someone else in,
No.
in the community or at another symphony or in general, like someone who served as a benchmark or a...
Well, I mean, I think that
person's not really likely to be listening, so I think it's safe.
Yeah. I mean, my role was one of serving a lot particularly in the orchestra business. And so I made a lot of acquaintances, let's put it that way. A lot of people that I was very, very proud to know, guest conductors and guest soloists and many of those people that were just really wonderful to me because I was a fledgling at first and I received a lot of support because I was in, I just felt lucky to have been chosen by the Ford Foundation, for example, to be able to be an intern. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was classic. This is a sidebar, but there were 2 interns that were sent to Detroit Symphony at the same time, Charlie Wingo. And Charlie Wingo was this Virginian. He had taken his master's in MBA at Charlottesville. Charlie comes in and he can't conceive of music management. I mean, it's not anything that he's been taught at Charlottesville. And the poor guy just struggled and couldn't make it. And and we'd talk about, he'd say, why are they doing these things this way? This isn't the way corporations run. This isn't the way it's supposed to be. And he didn't last very long. And so, I saw that as an example of, wow, you really have to be open and try to understand what's going on and be very flexible in a field that is changing course constantly. Because that was, as I was saying, orchestras at my time were beginning to change in how they survived. Mm-hmm. And it was just a very interesting kind of thing. I went off the road there, but
that's great.
I never really had rivals. I'm not one of those people who I don't like rivalries. I don't mind competing, but I never was put in that position where I felt I got where I was on my own merits and didn't have to really compete for that.
I see. I may have to drop this question eventually, but I'm just interested in it. The reason I ask it, I haven't mentioned in a previous podcast why I ask it is because, I think, when it comes to work, managing a career, aspiring to something, it's hard, right? As I was saying, anything worth doing is difficult. Mm-hmm. And, there's many ways to be successful. There are multiple paths to be successful. And, I feel like there were times in life where I used that as a way to motivate myself.
I have an example. Actually, I'm thinking now. So back to the orchestra business. In 1979, 78-79, Antal Dorati was our music director. And he was a very powerful musical figure. He came to the Detroit Symphony insisting that we would restart recordings, and he chose London Decca. And so we had a large London Decca recording contract, and then he insisted that he wanted a European tour. And it would be the first time the orchestra went to Europe, the first time they went abroad. They traveled a lot domestically, but they did not travel abroad.
I see.
So I guess my rival and my nemesis at that point was the fact that he had brought on a gentleman to be his artistic advisor, who was a nice chap, but he and I clashed. And at the same time, there was a new executive above me who came aboard just after the whole tour had been planned. And so we go off on this tour. It's a 5-week tour of Europe, which was extraordinarily large. I mean, generally tours were about 3 weeks. Ours was 5 because Girardi wanted to be all over the place. And I came forward, I felt, to make a lot of decisions because some of these other administrators on board were reluctant to keep things. I mean, lots of things went wrong. And so I came forward to make sure that things went as right as possible to succeed. Mm-hmm. And I guess the thing that was so wonderful for me as we closed the 5 weeks, I think we had a dinner in Basel or something like that. And I gained faith with Girardi because we had more screaming fits all the way through when he wanted overtime and I wouldn't give it to him. And I'd go into the dressing room and he'd have these wire coat hangers that he was twisting and looking at me like, how could you do that to me? Uh-huh. So it was just a very exciting kind of thing. And I did have to work over rivals in a sense. I had to sort of keep things moving because the rest of them were kind of fussing around with details, and we didn't have time to do that kind of thing. So I don't know whether that's apt or not.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I just think it's an interesting... I mean, it sounds to me like your world has personalities.
Oh, yes. Right? Very definitely.
And so you have personalities at every level, right? So from the donors to the performers to your conductor and so on.
Absolutely.
And so,
yeah.
Did you learn any, what's the sort of secret to dealing with a personality, with a big personality?
Listening, I think, principally, and backing away if it's too forceful, letting them calm down. I mean, the music business is full of people who are giant egos. And so
I saw the movie Whiplash, so I know all about this.
And so you just have to sort of back away, pay them homage, get it done, and move on, kind of thing. Yeah.
It sounds really quite improvisational, actually. So you think about so for the listener, we had Front Deranged, a Boulder-based improv group, perform. And one of the things I really like about improv is the focus on listening. When you're watching good improv, you see the performance, you see the actions, but the thing that makes great improv is the ability for the teammates to listen to one another.
Yes. And
that's incredibly difficult to do while at the same time you're trying to think about what it is you're going to say and what it is you're going to do. I think that ends up being a skill that I think is really quite useful. And with regard to your original intern teammate, is not taught in business school. It's not taught really anywhere except probably in improv class.
Right.
So I want to talk to you a little bit in the last few minutes that we're here about retirement. Mm-hmm. So I need you to prep me for retirement, right? Because at this point, I'm having a hard time envisioning it for myself. I was joking to Cindy, who put this on, that I'm like, can I put down a deposit for this place? This seems like a really vibrant, wonderful place to be. And I'm not just saying that because they invited me here to do this. So what's like... Did you have a plan for retirement? Did you stick to it?
Yeah. My wife is a few years younger, and so I retired roughly at 65, and she did a few years later. We decided to stay in Boulder, and we had a lovely home on West Pearl, and we enjoyed it very, very much. And then I guess it was 2012. I mean, we had looked at the academy. I mean, there was nowhere else for us here in the community because I was with the festival. We were neighbors with the academy, and we saw it grow and we saw it come alive and so forth and so on. And I knew Gary and Karen. They were on my board at the festival. I knew Joe Romano. He was on my board at the festival.
I don't know who these people are.
They are the backers and owners.
I see.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay. And so we were in the stream of knowing about the Academy.
So you were retired living in your home.
That's correct.
You had been for 12 years.
Yes, yeah.
And so before you talk about moving here, how did life change? Besides that you don't have to listen to musicians as much. That was a bad joke.
Yeah. How did life change? Well, I got very involved in youth exchange program with Rotary. So we had a lot of high school kids in and out of the house from foreign countries and so forth and so on. I got involved in a number of, when I left the Color on Music Festival, I was asked to come on a number of arts boards in Boulder and some city boards. And so, I spun out that.
I see.
So it was sort of away from the desk, but still involved with the arts and still sort of making decisions in the arts field. But slowly it was fun to diminish that, and just this nice recession, I would call it, away from all of that eventually, because it was time and it's political, and I get tired of that sort of political kind of thing.
I think for me as a professor, that's probably the thing that would push me to retirement earlier than later. And I think this is the case oftentimes in life, is the more senior you get, the further away you get from that thing that drew you into your work. And so, I find it, I make time to write every day, but I find it I really have to work incredibly hard to find that time, to keep that time sacred. And but you're become an administrator and to deal with, and I don't think, maybe academics aren't as bad as people in the arts, but those faculty meetings are pretty brutal.
I'm sure.
I'm sure. So I could see why that would be to be able to focus on the things the parts of it that you like doing and removing the things that you don't like seems like a great gift of retirement. Yeah. Have you picked up anything new?
I wouldn't say I have. We're living a relatively quiet life now, and that's what we want.
Okay.
And we do go to Maine in the summer. We make the driving journey.
Yeah, that's fun.
And go on a nice little island, which is a very nice change from here. And it's pleasant and wonderful. And we have kids and grandkids that will come and visit us. So, that part comes into play to a certain degree.
Where family
to
come to the forefront.
Yeah, exactly.
I see that. So, I really enjoy doing this. I always ask my guests what they're reading, watching, or listening to that really stands out to them, that they think is worth sharing.
Well, the pianist Eula Lang, I'm going crazy about.
Okay.
Chinese lady, and she's amazing artist, and you can go on YouTube and watch her perform the Prokofiev Third Piano Concerto, and you can't believe it. It's just amazing.
So for the listener and for me who doesn't know who she is.
She's Chinese. She's probably 28 now, and I might not quite have her name right. It's Eula Lang, I think. Not going to quite get that, but if you go on into YouTube and you put in Steinway Factory Prokofiev Toccata, you'll get her.
Okay. I'll put it in the exhibits
and they invite her on a very cold day into the factory, I think in Brooklyn, wherever the Steinway factory is over there. And she dresses wildly. So she has these stiletto Gucci things on and a fur around her neck. And she does this, the Prokofiev, it's a toccata for piano. Okay. It's incredible. From there, you can go start streaming down and see this amazing performance with the Concertgebouw Orchestra in Amsterdam of the Prokofiev Third. And she does amazing Rachmaninoff and so forth. So she's my favorite listening source right now.
Yeah, that's great.
I was just introduced to a book that one of our community members has suggested, Virgil Wander by Leif Enger. It's his third book. Charming book. He has a wonderful way with words, and that's what I've been reading. I'm reading, as I mentioned, American Decorative Arts. I have piles and piles of antiques magazines, and for years, the editor of that magazine was Wendell Garrett, And I never really read his essays. And so his essays were I think he started his essays in 1973, and I'm now in the 90s, and I think I'm getting close to the end. But amazing writing. Somebody should take all of those essays and compile them and publish them. So I'm doing that on the side. I'm a big women's volleyball fan.
Okay.
CU.
Buffs.
Go Buffs. And I'm missing the Washington CU men's basketball game because of you tonight, which doesn't make me very happy, but here we are.
I hope they win and you're pissed even more at me. Michael, it's really been a pleasure. I thank you so much for doing this, and I thank our audience, and I thank Front to Range for performing for us. How about everybody give a round of applause for Michael? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to visit petermcgraw.org for more information about our guest, show notes, and social media links. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share with others. Join Dr. Peter McGraw next week for another fun, fascinating conversation on I'm Not Joking.
Yo.